Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for coming back to Listening In, the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society podcast. My name is Faye Blackwell and I am the Head of Engagement and Development here at the Society. In this series, we really wanted to provide the opportunity for you to listen in to some of the conversations that I'm lucky enough to have every day. That is, with a variety of wonderful people and organisations, all working in the field of mental health and well-being. Today, I'm talking to Kelly Bird, Chief Professional Standards Officer at counselling awarding body CPCAB, and Meg Moss, Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the Society. Kelly and Meg came together by chance after learning they had a shared interest in and concern about the steady growth of AI and digitisation within the profession, in both counselling and counselling training. As a result, NCPS and CPCAB are now collaborating on the campaign Therapeutic Relationships, the Human Connection. We started our conversation by learning about Meg and Kelly's individual roles in their day-to-day work and also about a shared ethos between the organisations. As Kelly says quite simply, we saw a synergy between the two organisations in caring about the profession. So, Meg, shall we start with you? Many people will know who you are in terms of our members for sure. But if you'd just like to introduce yourself, and then Kelly, you can follow after us and tell us just a bit about yourself as well, if that's okay.
So I am Meg Moss. I'm Head of Policy and Public Affairs. I do waffle on quite a lot about things for the Society. So most of our kind of blog posts will have been me, lots of different articles for the magazine and things over the years, because in February 2025, it'll be 10 years since I joined the Society. So been here a while. And I don't know, what do I do? So policy stuff, which is as exciting as it sounds, and public affairs, which is really interesting at the moment. Obviously, we've just had the general election, and that was quite a busy period for the Society, making sure that we're really aware of who's doing what and why, and looking at all the manifestos and reading them and, seeing what kind of impact those kind of policies might have on our profession. And now we're the other side of that, and we're just having to kind of figure out who's going to be doing what in the new Labour cabinet. But, they've got so many different MPs to choose from for their cabinet positions. So, interesting to see what's going to happen with that. And I don't know, I've just been at the Society for so long now. I feel I've done lots of different things, and I know lots of different members and have lots of different connections with people throughout our membership and across the profession. So most of the time I feel like I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know anything, but sometimes I get reminded that I actually do a little bit. So maybe today, maybe today I'll sound like I know what I'm talking about. So,
you always do, Meg. You always do. And what you said about knowing members and getting to know people, I suppose that's Kelly. Just help you. And so that's a little bit about what this podcast has sort of come from. Is just us recognising how many incredible interactions we have with individuals and organisations and different people like that. And it was, I suppose, to stop being selfish and keeping them to ourselves all the time, to put that out and let our members, well, anybody else who chooses to yeah, hear the voices of some of those people we work with or we represent or whatever, and that's why we're really lucky to have you here today. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you along today.
Yeah, I think that really is what brings us together. I think it's about kind of, if we share our networks, then actually the greater the influence and the greater the input from our kind of stakeholders. So I'm Kelly. I work as the Chief Professional Standards Officer, CPSO of CPCAB. We are the queens of acronyms. We're the Counselling and Psychotherapy Central Awarding Body. My role there primarily is I kind of oversee our qualification service and our qualification development. And I'm typically the person who has contact with professional associations, employers in kind of counselling allied professions. So I do a lot of work kind of behind the scenes to try and make sure that CPCAB and the qualifications that we offer are really relevant in the profession. So it's kind of knitting, crocheting us into the tapestry of the counselling world so that our students get to fulfil their goals, because normally if they come to us it's because they want to be a counsellor or they want to get counselling skills. So it's about kind of being in service to that, or in service, I sound like Keir Starmer already, making sure that we do what it says on the tin of CPCAB.
I'm imagining Keir Starmer now crocheting a tapestry.
Yeah, if I'm going to steal his line, he can have one of mine.
Oh, that's such a lovely way to describe it, though. Such a lovely way to describe what you do. And something else I know we knew we were going to mention sort of at the start, perhaps, is certainly for the society, Meg and I know that the word ethos, values and ethos is really important to the work we do and sits at the heart of that. And so it seems right and proper that we should perhaps just look at the society and for you, Kelly, at the CPCAB, what you feel sits at the heart of the work you do. I suppose you've already mentioned it to a certain degree in terms of, the prospective counsellors that you're working with the students there. But should we go to you, Meg, first, just to talk a little bit about what sits at the heart of the work that I suppose we both do, that we all do here at the Society?
Yeah, so our ethos is such an important thing for everyone that works at the Society. I know for a lot of organisations that I've worked for before, your values are something that you kind of put on the wall and they are there and no one really pays any attention to them. But I think at the Society, we talk quite a lot about autonomy, we talk about creativity, we talk about diversity, we talk about connection. And those really are not 4 words that we came up with in a meeting and are trying to kind of project ourselves onto those words. Actually, they are words that have come about through the work that we've been doing quite organically. And I think they do actually really encapsulate what we try and do just day to day. It's really hard to explain to someone how, as a team of people at the head office of the Society, but also when we try to work with our members in, like you say, in committees and like panels and through our council and all of that sort of stuff. It's hard to explain how collaborative and how much that kind of matches our core values as people. I think how we are kind, we are facilitative, we are open, and we all do try to kind of leave our ego at the door, I think, when we have these kind of conversations with each other, and we will challenge each other and to make sure that we are upholding these principles, and connection, obviously, as we'll kind of go on to later in this kind of chat is a really, really big thing for all of us. Has that kind of described enough, do you think, Faye?
Yeah, I do. I think you're right. It's difficult for anybody, isn't it, whether that's individually or as an organisation, to talk about your fast-held beliefs, what sits at the centre and core of you as a person and individual, never mind when that's a collection of people that are all separate and different in their own unique ways, but share those beliefs and share those goals. And actually, I really love the way you said it. You actually said that with real confidence, and you've said it like you believe it and you know it to be true. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But then I suppose some people would say, well, you wouldn't you?
I would like to think that you can tell that we're being genuine in this. I don't feel like, well, I mean, probably someone could, but I definitely couldn't make that stuff up on the spot and have it. No, the opposite. I couldn't write that in advance and make it sound like I'd come up with it on the spot. That's what I meant to say. Yeah.
And actually, and Kelly, I know you were there too. We held our conference a few weeks ago, and I know we've had some of the feedback come back from that, and those sorts of words like authentic and real and, you know, kind and warm, those are the words that many people use in their feedback from that. So I think and I hope for the most part, you know, that does come across. And yeah, we might get things wrong sometimes or whatever, but you know, we do everything in the best way we can and with the best intentions that we can, don't we? So what about you, Kelly, and the CPCAB? What do you feel, what ethos, what values sit within your own community there?
I think very much like Meg has said, there's we actually do physically have a philosophy that's in a frame on the wall of our HQ. But we do like to think that it came from experience of working in the field, and it still very much lives kind of in a very alive way in our kind of staff community and in what we stand for. And I think there's kind of this interesting juxtaposition of, we kind of say CPCAB, we're the specialist awarding body in counselling, because it's what we do. It's the only thing that we do, which is rare for an awarding body. But there's something about this specialist expert idea that kind of almost makes it sound like, oh, we've got it nailed, we know everything that we're doing and we're brilliant at it. But I think when it's looked at from a counselling perspective, it's more about really owning the work that you do, seeking meaning in what you do, connecting with people, and knowing sometimes you're going to get it wrong and learning from that. And I think for us, we learn from the work that we do, we learn from the people that we're around, and we're really passionate about learning, I think, is kind of the key part of it. We're in education because we want to help people gain a greater sense of understanding around themselves and around the sort of work that they'd like to do, so that they can be compassionate practitioners, so they can be safe practitioners, and so they can do a really, really good job for the clients that they work with. So the majority of our staff are counselling practitioners, but not all. We draw in a lot of other specialisms. We've got tech experts, marketing, HR. We've got an amazing group of administrators. So we kind of get the best of both worlds in that we like to think we're a good awarding body, and we've got the specialists that work within us that kind of understand the profession and really care about the outcome for our learners. And I think that's where when we spoke with NCPS, we really saw a kind of synergy between the two organisations in really caring about the profession. And I think I've done so many interviews over the time I've been at CPCAB. I've been here for about 8 years now. And predominantly when you interview people, when you say, why do you want to come and work for CPCAB? They always say, because I want to do something meaningful. and worthwhile and have a positive impact on the profession. And it's lovely to work for an organisation where people come to you for that reason and stay with you for that reason. So yeah, it's a good place to work, and it's really nice finding kind of friends and similar passions in the NCPS.
Oh, that's really lovely to hear. And actually, you said it just as I was thinking of it, and that is that word care seems to sort of resonate for both organisations. You caring about your learners, your students and your colleagues. And I think we would say we feel very much the same about our members. We care very much about them as individuals and human beings in their own right, as well as the work that they do and the clients that they work alongside. So there's that shared in the cat walks across.
Brilliant. CPCAB also have an awful lot of company pets.
That's so lovely. Yeah, so there's this clearly this very personal attitude that both organisations have, but that's something very different, isn't it? That alignment in that sense to what we do, I suppose, although ultimately we're representing you people, Kelly, at the start of their journey, us obviously after they've graduated, although of course I suppose students are part of our work too. But how did it come about that you and Meg are sat here in front of me today, and that we find ourselves working together and collaborating with each other on this new campaign at the moment? I don't know who wants to start. Kelly, it looks like it's over to you.
I think it started through, I think both organisations, unbeknown to each other, were kind of working in the background, kind of tussling over an emerging difficulty, a challenge in the landscapes. And it was through kind of a different meeting that we were in about AI, strangely enough, where we realised that actually there was kind of a parallel process going on between CPCAB, who were looking at the impact of kind of digitisation on the training landscape, and then NCPS, who were looking at the impact of digitisation on the counselling landscape. And I heard a phrase come up about NCPS really kind of championing the importance of kind of real human being connection in counselling. And I said to one of my colleagues, well, real counselling training with real human connection is what we're wanting to champion at the moment. Maybe we could have a chat and see whether actually there's an alignment in our aims. So yeah, it kind of came out from thinking actually we're facing the same thing but through kind of a slightly different lens, and actually maybe if we work together we'd have a greater impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember the meeting. It was in the very first expert reference group on AI, and I just happened to be in a breakout room. So anyone who spends any time on Zoom meetings or team meetings is probably aware of the breakout room and how sometimes they can be great and sometimes they can be not so great. But this one, I happened to end up in a breakout room with Molly Eyre at CPCAB, and I'd been running this whole human relationships campaign thing around in my head for a little while, and I'd started kind of crystallizing it a bit. And the conversation we were having, I was just thinking out loud, like, I'd really like to run this campaign. And Molly then got in touch afterwards and was like, let's talk more about it. And I was just really excited to have someone else, and turns out a whole organisation else, who's just as passionate about this topic as I am, because it can be quite a lonely world, the world of campaigning and lobbying, especially if you're the only person that's really passionate about your particular topic. And it feels really heartwarming to have these other wonderful people who are also really interested in this. It's also quite validating as well, which is nice. And I imagine you guys probably feel the same way, like we're both we both think that this is important, so we're probably both on the right track. Because if we've kind of both come to it separately, then there's clearly something there, right?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is the first official campaign that CPCAB have ever done. And I think even in the process so far, we've learned an awful lot from Meg in terms of kind of the idea of lobbying and really kind of putting our voice to our beliefs. I think typically we've always had quite a lot of opinions internally, but what we tend to do is we kind of beaver away quietly in the background and try to make things better. But it's rare that we feel strongly enough about something to kind of raise our heads up and say, actually, we need to speak out. We can't just we can't stay silent on this issue. So it was really validating to have NCPS kind of say, actually, this is the sort of thing that we feel strongly about as well. And maybe if we raise our voices together, it could really make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting. I don't think I either realised or remembered perhaps that this had come from, you said a seminar or something about AI. Anyway, that's how those conversations, that's really interesting. Was there anything particular in that particular group or on that particular day that stood out to either of you as perhaps confirming and consolidating the fact that something you really did want to speak out about this and something really needed to be said and hopefully to be done? Do you remember if anything sort of really stood out on that day?
Yeah, I think for me, because it was a meeting of quite a few big organisations within counselling and psychotherapy, for me, it really underlined how kind of insidious the whole thing was, AI within therapy, and really how far the technology had already spread into how clients might be using it, how therapists are using it. And a lot of that is down to, the knowledge and research that Counselling Tutor have done. Ken and Rory at Counselling Tutor are really knowledgeable on all things kind of AI and therapy. They shared a lot of their knowledge. And also we heard from other professional bodies about what had been happening within their membership in terms of AI and therapy. And it felt like one of those moments of kairos. Is that how you pronounce it, Faye? The kairos, that it's a Greek word, I think, of like seizing the moment. I know, and I know you probably understand how those things are said. So I don't. Yeah, it just felt like just seize the moment. Let's do something. So it did kind of have an impact on that, seeing what was actually really going on everywhere, and not just within our own little bubble.
And for you, Kelly?
I think I was at the ERG, so Molly was there.
Oh, it's Molly, sorry,
on behalf of our company. But it was that moment that Meg was speaking about that Molly literally finished that meeting, rang me and said, Kelly, this thing you've been kind of walking around CPCAB banging the drum about for the last few months and kind of trying to consider kind of what we can do with it. You'll never believe what Meg has just said in the ERG. I think there's a real connection there. So yeah, I think it was kind of the spark that lit the fire of the campaign.
And I know we've said sort of internally, haven't we, Meg, that we're not always sure how much members in the field, and I hold my own hand up to this, counsellors sat in practice with a client unnecessarily aware, because in that moment in time, that's just an intense relationship between two people. AI feels like it's a million miles away. And we're not entirely sure how important or relevant it feels to people there, out there on the front line, as it were. And I think, am I right in our survey recently? We did ask a little bit about it, did we? Is that my mistake?
No, we did. Yeah, we asked about it.
And did that back that up?
Yeah, so people aren't really using it. Not a huge amount, but a lot of our members are worried about it.
Right.
So, yeah, so I think we'll see more and more people using it, but I think there is a lot of concern there.
Yeah. So there's awareness of it, but there's a fear attached to it, perhaps, or an anxiety. Perhaps fear is too strong a word. I don't know. So from our individual perspectives, and Kelly, I'll ask you first. What's in it? Sounds like, here we go, it's one of those potentially stupid questions, but what feels important about this, about the human relationship within a therapeutic context, connection in that context? What feels really important about it from CPCAB's perspective?
I think for us it's really about we understand as practitioners, and practitioners out there know that, and the research shows that genuine human connection and the relationship is what matters in terms of counselling, in terms of improving someone's mental well-being. And in order, from our point of view as an awarding body, as training providers, it's our responsibility to make sure that practitioners moving into the field, trainees, have a genuine experience of being able to provide that human connection in their training, because otherwise the quality of practitioner work will begin to degrade. So for us, I think the thing that was important, and the thing that really brought us to this, was the realisation that digital forms of training, asynchronous online training without any human connection in it, was suddenly really blooming in the landscape. And I think where Meg said earlier about practitioners have a kind of a fear of AI, but maybe aren't using it, what we've actually experienced is, to some degree, just not even enough awareness of why human connection is important in training, to even be wary of these digital alternatives. So it's at that starting point where people are looking at doing their first counselling skills qualification, and that they've got the option of doing it at their local college with a experienced counselling tutor and a group of 12 who are also in the same place, really excited, wanting to learn. And then they've got the other college down the road that is saying you can log on at any point and you can do this online training course. You won't see your tutor unless you need to email them to ask a question, and you won't have any peers. Don't worry, it'll be great for you. You can do it all in your own time, and you can qualify just the same as you would do if you'd done the college at Joe Bloggs down the road. But you don't need to worry with any of that pesky actually attending a class or doing any self-awareness learning. You can get to the same place anyway. And the community used to self-police really, really well. People used to understand the difference. But in the pandemic, something changed. And the push for the equation of this distance digital learning, to essentially doing the same thing in terms of training you to be a good practitioner, somewhere got lost in the mist. So for us, when we're talking about kind of the impact of digital tools on training, we're really talking about the replacement of good core practitioner training with digital alternatives. Digital, best case scenario, sometimes they get sent a workbook, they fill it in, they send it back and they pass. So for us, it's really about protecting what are the good pathways to being a counsellor that will actually get you there. Because to some degree, if we don't keep that path alive, then it almost won't matter if the government replace all the counsellors with AI bots in the future, because the counsellors getting there won't have ever counselled a human being anyway. So it's kind of almost, we need to protect the start point, because otherwise it's just going to be, I use the phrase, a race to the bottom in terms of training standards, because it's just looking like we're fighting against people offering it cheaper, faster, simpler, with less effort on the part of the trainee. And we know it takes a lot of effort to be a counsellor, and it should. It's a responsible position to hold. You should have to develop yourself in order to get there. You have to, otherwise you're not going to be any use to a client.
Absolutely. That's also beautifully and eloquently put, Kelly. Thank you. And I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? It's just extraordinary, basically, isn't it? It would be like, I wonder how people would feel about seeing a doctor who had trained and never touched or seen a human being, or a baker that had trained, I'm going to go somewhere completely out there now, a baker that had never kneaded dough or, stirred cake mix or anything. I mean, you just can't imagine it, and we wouldn't expect that. And yet here it is within our own profession, within our own industry. And I know sometimes the trouble is when something sounds so out there and so extraordinary, I think sometimes that's when it's easy to turn away from it and go, well, that can't ever happen. That would never happen, would it? And yet, as you so rightly say, we're seeing it happening. It is happening. What about from the society's perspective, Meg?
Well, can I also just talk about another thing that is something that CPCAB have really taught me in this, which is, and I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about this, Kelly, but we're talking about the funding side of things. And so since you told me about this, I have actually been banging on about it quite a lot, which is that, and please correct me if I am wrong on any of this, and you probably need to expand on it, but how there is a pot of funding for adult education. Is that right? And you can use that for counselling training. Oh, I don't think I'm going to explain this very well now.
So that's a government pot.
Yeah, that training providers can draw on for adult education. And I keep getting different short courses sold to me through my email address for random different things. So I'm vaguely aware of it. These fully funded courses that you see, and some people offer them in counselling, but these courses often don't have any, like you were saying, any guided learning hours attached to them, but everyone gets their own unique pot of that government funding, right? So if you use your pot of government funding on an adult education course to help you change your career, and you use that and you use it on a course that won't get you to registration with an accredited register and won't get you any experience working with clients, you'll get to a point and you'll have to restart. Now, do you do that? Well, you can't do that with the government funding anymore because you've used it. Do you then self-fund that? What if you can't afford to do that? Which lots of people can't afford to do because counselling training probably outside of their budget, right? Mm. So then you stop on your journey. And one of the things that we're really concerned about as a profession is how diverse it is. And we actually talk a lot about how can we increase diversity in our profession? How can we increase access to kind of training to people maybe from people who don't have as much money. We're talking about class in therapy. Therapy is often considered a very middle class profession. How do we get more working class people in therapy? Well, that's through these government funding pots, but you access that, doesn't go anywhere because you haven't had any face-to-face training. you try to register with NCPS and we go, I'm really sorry, not enough of that is face to face, or none of that is face to face. We can't have you on the register. And then what? So that for me is such an important part of increasing diversity in the profession, and something that we don't currently have any control over. But like, how can we fix that? Have I explained that enough, Kelly? I don't know.
Yeah, you've actually done a very good explanation of it, Meg. I think when I was talking about kind of the old days when people before the pandemic, when there's always been these distance courses that made claims of everything. Train to be a counsellor in the weekend, you get a coupon off Groupon, and you can be a level 4 counsellor without having done anything. Just fill in this workbook, tick these boxes, you're done. That's always been there. But it's always looked, people can always see the loopholes in that, they can see the problems with it. The real shift in the landscape is with these qualifications that draw down funding. So the government does allocate money to learners. So if you are unemployed or low income, things like that, you can apply for full funding, co-funding, which is part funding, for any qualification that's on the regulated register. And the amount of funding that any college can draw down is based on the assigned guided learning hours to that qualification. So our level 2 is 90 guided learning hours, our level 3 is 90 or 150, depending on which pathway you go through. So a centre that runs that's got a funding contract can draw £800 worth of funding from the government for that learner to pay for their teaching. That's what the funding pot is meant to be for. And once you've used your level 2 funding pot, once you've used your level 3, which is the loan funding pot, you're then not really allowed to, not meant to, go back and do the same qualification again with another awarding body because you've done it. And in theory, that should have got you where you wanted to go. The difficulty we've seen since the pandemic is that there are qualifications that on paper say they are 200 guided learning hours, 300 guided learning hours. But when you actually go there, it's an online course where it says you may or may not take 200 hours to complete this qualification. Most learners complete it in 10. But don't worry, you're fully funded for it. And then you realise that actually all you're doing is filling in an online workbook. It's taken you 4 hours to do. But they've got your £800 that is meant to pay for the teaching hours. It's meant to pay a tutor's salary. So there's also the careers of counselling tutors that are being eroded by this as well. Because when they are going to a college and they're saying, we've had a tutor recently contacted us and said, I've applied to teach for this college, they're not with you. Their course should be 270 guided learning hours, but they've told me I only need to teach 50. And I've asked them if they're another tutor, and they said, no, it's fine, that's how long most students take to do it. And I've said, but it says it's got an assigned guided learning of 270. And they said, yeah, well, you can use the rest of it to do your prep work and probably your marking in. And that's not what guided learning hours is about. Guided learning hours are meant to be the hours the learner gets guided by the tutor. So there are people who are using their pots of funding on qualifications that should have 200, 300 guided learning hours in them. And it's getting them nowhere because they've never had a peer feedback session, they've never spoken to a tutor, they got one piece of feedback from the tutor that said you missed a comma in your workbook, and that's it. And then they tried to progress, or they tried to go to the professional associations, and they realised they've gone a terrible quality route that's not going to get them anywhere. They go back to start again, they try and sign up and get their funding, and they say, sorry, your learner registration number already has level 2 funding used. You've already got a level 3 loan. You can't get another level 3 loan in the same topic. We're terribly sorry.
Goodness, that's shocking. I can't, and you know, you put yourself in the position of being somebody like that, and somebody that's aspiring to, whether that's change a career or get into a career that they've always wanted to, taking that leap of faith, perhaps, especially if it is somebody from a low income background or whatever, and just finding that it's got them nowhere or very little.
Yeah. And the whole reason we started as an awarding body in the first place was because at the time, 30 years ago, there wasn't a decent vocational training route for counsellors. You always had to go through university, which is expensive. It has problems in terms of class and financial kind of backing. So we always wanted to provide inclusive pathways, and we still do that. That's still really at the heart of what we do. But we're kind of being battered from every angle by other people saying, well, we can offer it cheaper because we don't pay our tutors. We don't have to pay a tutor because they can do it all online. We just get somebody in at the end to mark the online workbooks and jobs are good. Yeah, it's not good enough for our learners, and it's not good enough for the profession.
Absolutely, and in the longer term, not good enough for clients. Because, of course, as we all know, people don't have to join an accredited register. They could still. So, is it also potentially, I know this is probably a little bit out there, but could it potentially, lead to people just striking out on their own anyway?
Yeah, we've talked about it being a public protection issue as well before. So there is definitely that in there, I think.
I mean, we know in an unregulated profession, there really is nothing other than public opinion stopping somebody from printing out a label that says counsellor, putting it on their front door and setting themselves up. But I think there's something even more insidious about somebody who possibly even has done what they think is a full practitioner training route because they've been told that by the company that sold it to them. And then they may be approached NCPS and say, I'd like to be registered. And you say, well, you can't do because you're training. You've never had a taught hour. How angry would that person have to be to then say, well, I'm just going to go and put a sign on my door anyway. I've paid my money. I've done my dues. I filled in all of my workbooks. It's kind of, that's even a new category of person. It's not just the person off the street who intends to be unethical and says, oh, I'm just going to set myself up to be a counsellor. It can't be that hard. It's the person who believes that they've trained, believes that they are not going to do harm. I worry that's even more harmful. I don't know why. Does that sound strange?
No, it doesn't sound strange at all to me when somebody doesn't have that awareness. And whether that is because that's what they've been told, that's what they've been sold, and so they've come to believe it, or whether they genuinely believe in their own competencies. I totally understand how that feels particularly risky for the public and for the profession as well. So I'm conscious of the time. I can't believe that we've gone 45 minutes already. And we've identified how we've come together, how we come to be sat here having this conversation, those shared beliefs, those shared concerns about what might be happening and changing in the profession. And we've identified the problems that are there. So I suppose perhaps it's important to spend the last part of our conversation working out, well, you helping us understand what can be done about it. This is the problem. What's the solution to the problem? What can we do about it as individual organisations? And what can anybody out there with any interest and any shared concerns, what could they do about it too? I know that's a very big question, but ultimately, I feel it's really important to give you both the time and space to talk about that side of it too. Meg, do you want to take that one first?
So I think for us, one of the big things is one of the things about our side of the campaign is that we want to talk about how therapy is commissioned within the public sector. So that's kind of, there's two ways of thinking about that. That's the fact that you don't have any choice over your therapist or the type of therapy you receive if you go down the public sector route. So through the NHS, for example, or through any publicly funded mental health service provision. And the other side of it is that there is an increasing amount of digital apps and kind of use of AI assessment tools, like clinical assessment within mental health services now. So it's growing. So the NHS pushed through a number of digital mental health apps last year through NICE guidelines so that they could get them used as quickly as possible, because obviously there's huge waiting lists within the NHS talking therapy service, and the way to reduce those when you can't afford to pay any more therapists really is to use digital tools. But what we're really saying and what we're trying to convey to commissioners and even members of the public who might want to look for a therapist themselves, or who might want to try and get some support for their mental health, for example, is the most important thing is the therapeutic relationship between the therapist and the client or the patient, if you're talking NHS kind of parlance. That's the thing that makes therapy effective. So there's been decades and decades of research into this, commonly known as the common factors of psychotherapy. So it's not really so much about the tools that you use, the modality that you use. That's, that kind of comes into it slightly, because if the patient, the client, believes that the therapy is going to work for them, that's really important. If they're motivated to work within this, whatever kind of therapeutic framework that you're offering, that's also really important. So if a client really wants to work in like a CBT way, great. That will probably work for them. If they want to work in a slightly more kind of psychodynamic way, that's probably what's going to work for them. It sounds really obvious when you talk about it, right? But that's not something that we're kind of seeing in the NHS or kind of anywhere within the public sector where you have mental health provision. So what we're really trying to do is to call on them to almost reconsider how they see evidence of therapeutic efficacy. Like, everyone talks about evidence-based therapy while also ignoring the step before that, which is actually what makes therapy effective. Start looking there and you'll see that actually you probably need to do a little bit of reforming what you're offering. You probably need to start from a position of giving people autonomy, as we love to talk about, in choosing their therapist. Lots of us, me particularly, I've been through NHS talking therapies a couple of times and never got the opportunity to choose who I got to speak to, right? And that would have made a huge difference for me because of the things that I personally wanted to take. And I didn't feel like, the first time I didn't hugely feel like I vibed with my therapist. He was brilliant. I'm just going to say he was brilliant. But I probably wouldn't have chosen him. And I don't think I got everything I needed out of that relationship, right? But the second time, I was in the complete throes of like postnatal meltdown, and I just got offered some workbooks and stuff. And that's not just me. And I'm very conversant in this space, right? And I knew what was good enough and what's not good enough. And I had the capacity to kind of advocate for myself. But I am like such a small minority of people who live in this world that talk about this stuff all the time. Like, that is my job. So I just worry about all the people out there that are going, that's not what I want. And then they can't afford to go to find someone privately that they need to, to get the kind of support that they actually need. And whenever I talk to people about this kind of stuff at like conferences or meetings, they go, I like my daughter, she went through NHS talking therapies. It didn't really work, but we're so lucky that we could afford to pay for a counsellor for her. And it's like, yeah, but the not that many people can afford to do that, especially not in the cost of living crisis. Fewer and fewer people can do that. There's so much that goes into it. But what we're basically doing is, sorry, I've waffled a bit, lobbying to change how we think about therapeutic efficacy. Whether or not we'll be able to get that point across, I don't know, but it's a very exciting time. New government maybe will get some traction because potentially very fresh and passionate and interested in new ways of doing things. Loads of other benefits like cutting waiting times and all that sort of stuff, because you potentially open yourself up to a pool of all of the counsellors and psychotherapists in the UK and all of the other kind of mental health professionals, and everyone has the opportunity to work in a way that suits them. That's the idea. And also, don't use apps for everything, and definitely don't try and use AI to replace the therapist. That's also in kind of what we're talking about as well. It's a really big conversation, but that's what we're doing. And if anyone wants to get involved, definitely we'll be providing some resources. Write to your MP. This is my top advice for making some kind of change now over the next 5 years. Write to your MP. We can give you a template, or I can give you some words to use, or whatever you need. But that's going to be the key thing if you want to get involved. And we're posting about stuff a lot on social media. So I think one of the things for us, and also for CPCAB, is we want to change hearts and minds as well around what it's important to look for in a therapeutic relationship, and when you need support with your mental health, what you should be considering. And you should be considering how important that relationship with another person is when you're considering that. It's not just typing out words on a screen and having words come back at you. It's about relational stuff. So
I think it's such a testimony to human resilience and determination, and actually intuition, that somebody can go, let's say, for talking therapies on the NHS, come out of that feeling perhaps a little disheartened. Maybe they've got some tools from it, maybe they've got some, but they know somehow they've got that intuition that wasn't what they needed or wanted. And yet it's easy for us, isn't it, here to have this conversation where, as you say, Meg, we have that sort of insider knowledge. We know about different approaches. We know what else is out there and where we can get it from, but a lay person may not know what that is. And yet they come out of that experience and still look and seek for something different, even if they don't know what it is. And that always has struck me in all the years that I've been practicing, because it would be so easy, wouldn't it, for somebody to either say counselling doesn't work because they think that one experience of counselling is what counselling is, or to say, I'm no good at counselling. I can't do it. I failed, and to not strike out again and try and find support elsewhere. But people do. They do that continuously. I'm sure there are people that also don't, who do fall by the wayside. But I think to win those hearts and minds, as you were saying, and to try and help people understand what might be the best thing for you and what is available is so important, because, yeah, we've been fed sort of one story. I think the public has been fed, quite a basic diet, haven't they, over recent years, and they're not aware of the richness and variety that's out there that could be so much more fulfilling and healing for them, perhaps. Yeah. So Kelly, what about you? What can be done about it, and what would you like people to do about it?
I think so. We're very much working in the same sort of avenues as NCPS. We've got a new web page about the Human Connection campaign, which is NCPS, and we're kind of signposting each other. We're trying to raise awareness through social media of essentially kind of the quality hallmarks to look for in good counselling training. Like you said, it's about people having the understanding so that they can make informed choices. And I think if people approach counselling training and they get given a workbook, or they approach counselling and they get given a bot and sent a workbook, if they don't know that isn't good enough, they will just leave and say, oh, well, counselling was rubbish for me, or counselling training was rubbish, I'm going to give up on that. So it's really about promoting what is available, kind of what richness and meaning is available through good counselling training and good counselling, so that people know what to look for and can be discerning in their choices. And also, I think the other part of it is, from both sides, is that lobbying and that approaching government aspect of it, because it's about stepping in now before those choices get cut down. So for us, what we're doing is we're in an evidence gathering phase at the moment. There's a survey that's going out that will be linked on both the websites. It will be all over social media as well, because we want people's experiences to kind of fuel the fire of the campaign. We want to know what matters to people. Because we are, from CPCAB point of view, we're going to be approaching the UK education regulators, we're going to be approaching the Department for Education and saying, do you know that these organisations are playing fast and loose with your definition of guided learning hours? You've said it needs to be direct supervision of a teacher. You're putting funding into this. Do you know that your funding is for a 300 guided learning hour course is being used when there's only 10 guided learning hours being delivered? Do you even know that this is happening? If you don't, we're going to point to it. We're going to let you know it's happening. And we are going to expect you to do something about it, because otherwise those will end up being the only courses that are available on the landscape, because they are cheaper. So centres are going to start hopping to those courses rather than go through CPCAB or universities and things like that. So, or I have to say, other awarding organisations are available. And there are other vocational awarding organisations that are not doing this. They're not cutting guided learning hours down. They, like us, are not involved in this race to the bottom yet, but I can't speak for their future plans. But we want to make sure that the good quality options stays being available to learners, because otherwise that will be all they have. And chatbots will be all they have when they go for talking therapies or email contact. And the human connection bit is what makes it work. So it's about kind of why are we chipping away at that? Why are we letting that be chipped away?
We were talking, weren't we, the other day, Meg, about how, although you mentioned earlier, Kelly, didn't you, that COVID seemed to really switch this into another gear almost. I know we were talking, Meg, about how what stood out for so many of us during COVID was about disconnection and detachment and not having that contact with our friends, our family, our community, and how difficult many of us found that. So it doesn't seem like too much of a stretch of the imagination to be able to say to people, is it not therefore, understandable that actually if you're seeking support at time of vulnerability, that or just, you're not feeling great and you just need that other person as a sounding board, that a person sat there to do that with is potentially going to be much more fulfilling, rewarding, and again, I'm going to use that word healing, than if you were doing that with some chatbot or app or whatever that might be. I think more than ever that's uppermost in our minds, in our memories, what it felt like to be isolated and have nothing but a screen or an app or a telephone with which to to communicate to other people. So, but it sounds like what you're both saying ultimately in terms of what can be done about this. It's the word in my head is inform. It's about, informing potential students what's available and what's important to consider and what will get them where they want to be. It's about informing the public about what counselling can and perhaps should look like, and how they, both students and potential clients, patients, deserve to get the best of what they're putting their money and their time and their energy into. And it's also informing those stakeholders, those powers that be, again, actually, what counselling is and can look like, and what a broad church it is. Is that fair to say? Is that cliche, isn't it? That informing people is then going to empower them, it gives them choice, and that makes a happier, healthier society, does it not?
That is the idea. And hopefully we can realise that together. I think it'll be really interesting to see how we get on actually kind of shaping these conversations, because they are big conversations. And I know that actually we're not the only people having these kind of conversations now. We are, organisations that have a fair amount of reach, but there are also individual people kind of talking about this stuff. So maybe we're kind of tapping into the zeitgeist a little bit on this, and maybe we'll kind of use that to carry us forwards and actually make a little bit of difference with this. And I think it will be some small changes, but those small changes will actually have a huge impact.
So is there a final call to action that might be worth saying, something positive, encouraging, motivating to anybody listening that agrees and wants to get on board with this message? Part of what we say in the introduction and the sort of the blurb for this podcast is, together our voices are louder, and that's a real fundamental belief at the heart of what we're doing here. So if we want to make that voice even louder, Meg, you mentioned earlier about perhaps writing to MPs, but is there anything else that either of you two can think of or suggest to people or encourage people to do?
Well, so for me, the thing that I have in my head is, feel free to be the voice for human connection. If you are impassioned by this, talk about it. If you want, there's loads of research on our campaigns page, but there's also some really great neuroscience stuff out there that you can read and that you can talk about, and that supports what we're talking about. You can look at the common factors in psychotherapy research and talk about that, and just talk about it. And hopefully that, if you talk about how important the human connection is in therapy to like 10 people who either are really interested or mildly interested or even not at all interested in it, just talk about it. You never know when it might come up for them. Hopefully we can just change the discourse around this by connecting with each other and communicating with each other, and that's how ideas spread, isn't it? So if you're interested, if you're passionate, even if you're like only medium passionate, just talk about it, waffle on about it on a Facebook post or something. I had a podcast about this the other day. Meg Moss from the NCPS said this, and Kelly from CPCAB said this. Just get involved. It's a really interesting, broad topic, and there is something for everybody in it. So, and also feel free to get in touch with any of us, and we'd love to talk about it more, honestly.
Yeah, I've often said it's easy to think that the change starts up there at the top and it's knocking those big doors open and speaking to the head honchos, but actually sometimes it's just about, like you said, Meg, isn't it? Just individual conversations, small conversations that then pull other people in or spread out. And that is what becomes loud. And then those doors can't stay shut anymore in the face of the volume of that conversation. So, yeah, that's a really good point. And what about for you, Kelly? Anything else that you would add?
I think I echo what Meg said. It's about choosing to get involved. So follow us on social media, do the survey, email us, ring us, kind of, if you've got thoughts, opinions, ideas on it, let us know. But what you said, Faye, there about sometimes it's not change coming from the top that really has the impact. It's the voice of the masses that really does.
Yeah.
Because when we're looking at people starting out thinking, oh, I might quite like to train to be a counsellor, they don't know who we are yet. They often don't know what a professional association is yet. Most people that want to train to be a counsellor, it's because they've either been through therapy or they know somebody who works in the field and is a bit of a role model for them, or they want to make a difference. But often people will say, oh, well, my mate's mum is a counsellor, so I asked her how she trained and what I should look for. Or, oh, this counsellor came into our workplace and I asked them how to get into the field. So the people listening to this podcast, if somebody comes to you and says, I'm thinking of training to be a counsellor, encourage them to ask good questions. What are they getting from their training? Are they getting guided learning hours? Are they being fobbed off with distance learning? Have they done their research? And kind of encourage them to do their research at that stage, because you're going to be talking to them before we even have a chance, before they know who we are. So it really is, the people do have the power, far more so than we do, really.
What a note to end on. The people have the power. Hey, I think that's probably the perfect close that we can have. Thank you for that, Kelly. Did you have that one planned in the back of your head? I'm only joking.
No, it just came up.
Wouldn't it have been amazing? Oh. Thank you to Kelly and Meg for joining me today. And thank you for listening in. All the links you'll need if you would like to know more about our joint campaign, Therapeutic Relationships, the Human Connection, are in the show notes below. This podcast is brought to you by the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, a professional home for counsellors, psychotherapists, and over 120 wellbeing organisations across the UK. Autonomy, diversity, creativity, and community are at the heart of what we do. We are creating a positive space for conversations with people who share common beliefs and goals, because together our voice is louder. If you would like to know more about the NCPS, please visit www.ncps.com for more information. And please remember to follow and subscribe so you're always part of the conversation.